Hey there, welcome to Sleepy Historian. I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use this video to fall asleep, so before you get too cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd love to hear from you. Now get cozy, take a deep breath, and let yourself relax. What it was really like to sleep in a medieval inn. Relaxing history for sleep. Alright, let's settle in. Lights low, phone face down, brain slowly powering off like an old Windows computer back from into medieval Europe. Not the shiny fantasy version with glowing castles and romantic taverns. Not the movie version with soft candles and clean wooden tables. We're talking about the real version, the damp version, the creaky version, the version that smelled like wet wool, smoke, old beer, and questionable life choices. And specifically, we're talking about medieval inns. Because if you were traveling in the Middle Ages, you weren't booking a hotel. You weren't checking reviews. You weren't comparing prices online. You were just walking until you were tired, cold, hungry, and mildly concerned for your survival. And then you went into the nearest building that looked like it might not kill you immediately. And even that was a gamble. Medieval travel was slow, exhausting, and deeply inconvenient. Roads were muddy, shoes were bad, horses were expensive, carts broke, bridges collapsed, and distances that feel short to us now felt like full survival expeditions back then. A 30-mile journey could take days, not because people were lazy, but because everything worked against you. Rain, wind, bandits, wolves, swamps, broken wheels, random injuries, and of course, getting lost, because maps were more like vague suggestions than actual directions. So when night came, you needed shelter, and that shelter usually came in the form of an inn, a tavern, a monastery, or sometimes just a farmer's house, if you were lucky and polite and didn't look contagious. Inns were not luxury spaces, they were functional survival spaces. Their job was not comfort. Their job was, you probably won't freeze to death here. And that was the selling point. A medieval inn was usually a large wooden or stone building with a big central room. That main hall did almost everything. People ate there, drank there, talked there, slept there, fought there, sometimes gave birth there, sometimes died there. Multi-purpose space, really. Very efficient, very unhygienic. The fire pit would usually be in the center, constantly burning. Smoke would rise up to a hole in the roof if you were lucky. If you weren't lucky, it just filled the room, and everyone slowly accepted mild smoke inhalation as a lifestyle. The air was thick, heavy, warm, damp, always damp. Wet clothes hanging everywhere, steam rising off travelers, horses outside, dogs inside, chickens sometimes inside, rats definitely inside, always inside. And the smell was a layered experience. You had smoke, sweat, animals, old food, spilled beer, wet hay, human bodies that had not seen soap in a while. And whatever mystery fluids had soaked into the floor over the last 50 years, it was a scent that stayed with you. It lived in your clothes. It moved into your hair. It followed you home, and you just accepted it because everyone smelled like that. Now sleeping. Let's talk about sleeping, because this is where the fantasy really falls apart. You didn't get a private room unless you were rich, and even then, private was generous. Most people slept in the main hall, on benches, on the floor, on straw, on sacks, on whatever surface wasn't already occupied by another exhausted human being. There were sometimes big communal beds, not two-person beds, not four-person beds. We're talking 10, 15, sometimes 20 people in one massive wooden bed. Strangers, complete strangers, merchants, farmers, pilgrims, soldiers, drunks, someone coughing, someone snoring, someone crying quietly, someone definitely stealing your boots if you fall asleep too deeply. Privacy was not a concept. Personal space was a fantasy. You slept next to whoever showed up, and no one thought it was weird. It was just life. Bedding was usually straw mattresses, straw that had been used, reused, and reused again. Straw that contained bugs, fleas. Blankets were heavy, wool, scratchy, thick, smelled like sheep and smoke. They were warm, but not clean. Nothing was clean, ever. And if you were lucky, you got a pillow. If you weren't lucky, you used your bag, or your arm, or a bundle of clothes, or nothing. And you slept anyway, because exhaustion always wins. Let's float gently over to the food situation, because medieval inns also fed you. And again, expectations need to be low, very low. Meals were simple. Bread, thick bread, dense bread, the kind of bread that could survive a fall off a horse. Stew, always stew. Some kind of meat, if you were lucky. Some kind of root vegetables, onions, turnips, cabbage, salt, a lot of salt, not a lot of spices, unless you were somewhere wealthy. Beer or ale was the main drink, not because people loved alcohol, but because water was often unsafe. Beer was safer. Weak beer, but still beer. Even kids drank it, because medieval parenting standards were different, and everything was served in wooden bowls, metal cups, or whatever container existed nearby, cleaned with water, maybe. Sometimes, if someone remembered, which they usually didn't. Now imagine trying to fall asleep in this environment. The fire crackling, people talking, someone laughing too loud, someone arguing, a drunk singing badly, a dog barking, horses shifting outside, wood creaking, wind howling, rain hitting the roof, rats running in the walls, someone coughing endlessly, someone praying quietly, someone whispering, someone snoring like a broken sawmill, and you're lying on straw, wrapped in itchy wool, breathing smoky air, surrounded by strangers, trying to sleep. And somehow, people did, because humans adapt to anything. The brain just goes, this is normal now, and shuts down. And there's something oddly calming about that, about how survival forces simplicity, no overthinking, no scrolling, no notifications, just darkness, exhaustion, and sleep. And of course, not all inns were the same. Some were slightly better, some were nightmares. Some were basically crime hubs with beer. Some were run by families who actually cared. Some were run by people who absolutely did not. Some were connected to monasteries, which meant stricter rules, quieter nights, and slightly better behavior, but still, same smells, same straw, same smoke, same bugs, same shared space, same medieval chaos. Let's drift gently into the people you'd meet there, because medieval inns were social crossroads, merchants with carts, pilgrims walking to shrines, messengers, soldiers, runaway apprentices, wandering musicians, monks, farmers, nobles in disguise sometimes, because, of course, they were, criminals, hustlers, storytellers. Everyone passed through inns. News traveled through inns. Gossip traveled through inns. Rumors were born there. Politics was discussed there. Deals were made there. Fights started there. Friendships formed there. And sometimes marriages started there too, because medieval romance had very low standards for location, and in between all of this, people slept, or tried to, because tomorrow meant walking again, riding again, working again, traveling again, surviving again. No rest days, no weekends, no mental health breaks, just movement, just endurance, just life continuing. There's something strangely peaceful about that rhythm, brutal but simple. And when the night finally settled, when the fire dimmed, when the voices quieted, when most people drifted off, the inn would fall into this low hum, crackling embers, slow breathing, occasional coughs, wood popping, wind outside, animals shifting, a soft, constant noise that wrapped around the room like a blanket. And in that moment, lying on straw, surrounded by strangers, medieval travelers slept, not comfortably, not luxuriously, but deeply, because exhaustion is the strongest sleeping pill in history, and tomorrow would be another long road, another muddy path, another cold morning, another distant village, another in another straw bed, another shared sleep with strangers who would vanish from their lives forever by sunrise. And slowly, gently, their world kept moving forward. No rush, no speed, just footsteps, wheels, hooves, and time. And that's where we'll rest for now, breathing slow, mind quiet, thoughts drifting, letting the medieval road fade into darkness, letting the fire die down, letting the noise soften, letting the world go still. And if you're still awake, that's okay. Just stay here. Let the rhythm carry you. Let the story blur. Let the past become fog. And let yourself drift. Let's keep drifting. No sharp turns. No loud moments. Just a slow, gentle continuation down the medieval road. Because while common travelers slept on straw in smoky halls, the nobles and royals had their own version of comfort. And by comfort, I mean slightly better bugs, thicker blankets, and more servants to pretend everything was fine. Because status changes many things, but it does not change reality. Not in the Middle Ages, not ever. Royal travel was not glamorous. It was exhausting, slow, and deeply inconvenient. Kings didn't just teleport between castles. They moved like caravans, entire moving villages, wagons, guards, horses, cooks, servants, advisors, priests, noblewomen, children, luggage, furniture. Yes, furniture, actual beds, sometimes, because of course they were that extra. Royal courts were constantly traveling because castles were not permanent luxury hotels. Castles were cold, damp, drafty stone boxes. So kings and queens moved between residences to avoid disease, filth, buildup, and political problems. One castle would get too dirty, too sick, too unstable, and the whole court would just leave. Medieval deep cleaning strategy, relocation. When royals stayed at inns, it was rare, but it happened. Usually in emergencies, bad weather, war, travel, or long pilgrimages. And when they did, the inn didn't magically become a palace. It was still a medieval inn, just with more tension, more fear, more pressure on the innkeeper not to mess up. Because messing up for peasants meant bad reviews. Messing up for nobles meant prison, fines, or losing your business. Royal sleeping arrangements were better, but not luxurious by modern standards. Portable beds were brought, heavy wooden frames, thick mattresses stuffed with feathers or wool instead of straw. Silk sheets, sometimes, if you were very elite. Curtains around the bed for warmth and privacy. But the room itself, still cold, still smoky, still damp, still medieval. Castles didn't have central heating. They had fireplaces that barely fought off the cold, stone walls that absorbed winter like emotional trauma, drafts that moved through corridors like ghosts. Royal chambers were massive but empty. Big spaces hold cold air, and medieval windows were basically decorative holes in walls. Glass was rare, shutters were wood, curtains were heavy cloth. So even kings slept in layers, nightclothes, robes, socks, hats sometimes, because hypothermia is not impressed by crowns, and nobles were deeply paranoid about safety. Beds were sometimes surrounded by guards. Doors were locked. Servants slept nearby, not for comfort, but for survival. Poisoning was a real fear. Assassination was a real fear. Betrayal was always on the table, so sleep was light, interrupted, uneasy, even for the elite. Let's float gently over to pilgrimages, because medieval Europe loved a good holy walk. Pilgrimages were massive cultural events. People walked hundreds of miles to shrines. Canterbury, Rome, Santiago de Compostela, local holy sites, healing shrines, relic churches. Everyone went, peasants, merchants, nobles, royals, sometimes, and along these routes, inns thrived. Pilgrim inns were some of the busiest in Europe, and they were chaotic. People arrived, injured, sick, exhausted, hungry, emotionally overwhelmed, spiritually confused. Some were genuinely devout. Some were just on vacation, medieval style. Some were hiding from the law. Some were running from marriages. Some were running toward marriages. Some just wanted to leave their village and see something different. And they all slept together, on floors, in halls, in barns, in shared rooms, in monasteries, in inns. Privacy, still not a thing. Cleanliness, still not a thing. Silence, definitely not a thing. Pilgrim inns were loud. Prayers, singing, crying, storytelling, confessions, arguments, trading, drinking, always drinking. Because medieval people processed emotions through alcohol and religion, a powerful combo. And at night, the same rhythm happened. Fire, smoke, breathing, snoring, coughing, bodies on straw, people wrapped in cloaks, bags under heads, feet sticking out from blankets, shoes lined up, boots stolen sometimes, money hidden inside clothes. Everyone half awake, half asleep, suspended in that strange space between exhaustion and fear. Let's drift into medieval noble psychology for a moment, because this is where the weirdness gets gentle and sad. Medieval elites were raised without emotional softness. Childhood was short. Affection was limited. Education was strict. Religion was heavy. Fear of sin was constant. Disease was normal. Death was common. Trauma was routine. So sleep wasn't just physical rest. It was escape, silence, darkness, a break from responsibility, a break from duty, a break from expectations. And nobles had strange sleep habits. Some slept sitting up because of breathing problems. Some slept with candles burning all night because of fear. Some slept surrounded by servants. Some slept alone in massive rooms that echoed with emptiness. Some slept with religious objects in their hands, relics, crosses, prayer beads. Some slept with weapons nearby, daggers under pillows, swords by the bed, because medieval anxiety had layers. Kings especially had terrible sleep. Politics never stopped. Threats never stopped. Paranoia never stopped. And the weight of rule never stopped. Imagine trying to relax when everyone wants your power, when alliances shift constantly, when family members betray each other casually, when marriages are political contracts, when your children are political assets, when love is optional and strategy is mandatory, sleep becomes shallow, fragmented, restless, and even in luxury, the mind never rests. Let's gently slide into medieval family sleeping arrangements, because they were not what we'd call cozy. Families often slept in the same room. Parents, children, servants, apprentices, sometimes animals. One space, one fire, one room. Everyone breathing the same air, sharing warmth, sharing disease, sharing everything. Children learned early that privacy didn't exist. Silence didn't exist. Alone time didn't exist. Emotional space didn't exist. Life was communal, constantly. And this created a very different psychology. People were less inward, less private, less introspective. Thoughts stayed simple, survival-focused, routine-based. Sleep was just another function, not a ritual, not a luxury, just a necessity. You slept when you could, where you could, how you could, and tomorrow you worked again. Let's float back to the inns one more time, because they really were the heart of medieval rest culture. They were not peaceful spaces, but they were human spaces, full of life, full of movement, full of voices, full of stories. They were where news spread, where rumors formed, where cultures mixed, where accents blended, where languages collided, where strangers became familiar for one night and disappeared forever by morning. And there's something quietly poetic about that. Temporary communities, temporary families, temporary safety, temporary warmth, temporary rest, and then gone. Roads continued. Lives continued. History moved forward, slowly, gently, without urgency, without speed, just footsteps and time. And as the medieval world turned, people kept sleeping in straw beds, under smoky roofs, wrapped in wool, surrounded by strangers, breathing heavy air, listening to the fire, drifting off into exhausted dreams. Not of luxury, not of comfort, just of rest, and that's enough. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts soften, let the images blur. Let the medieval road fade into darkness again, fire dimming, voices quieting, night settling, and the long, slow rhythm of history continuing without urgency. If you're awake, that's fine. If you're drifting, even better. Just stay in the rhythm. Let the past carry you. Let the present fade. Let the world soften. And we'll continue drifting forward together, slowly, calmly, gently. Let's keep drifting. No sudden turns, no sharp edges, just a slow slide deeper into the quiet parts of history. The parts where everything feels heavy, slow, and strangely calm. Because now we're moving into royal families, dynasties, bloodlines, the carefully arranged marriages, the deeply unhealthy genetics, the emotional emptiness dressed in silk and gold, and somehow all of it still feels tired. Medieval royalty lived inside systems, not families. Love was optional, strategy was mandatory, marriage was politics, children were assets, bloodlines were investments, and genetics, well, genetics were ignored completely because no one understood them yet. Royal families married cousins, second cousins, first cousins, nieces, nephews, uncles, aunts. If the bloodline stayed pure, they considered it a success, and by pure, they meant staying in the family, which, biologically, was not a great long-term plan. But medieval politics didn't care about biology. It cared about power, land, alliances, claims, titles, crowns, borders, control. And so the same families married each other again and again. generation after generation. The same bloodlines looping back into themselves like a closed circuit. And slowly, quietly, the results started to show. Sickly children, weak immune systems, physical deformities, mental health problems, chronic illnesses, infertility, fragile bodies, fragile minds, emotional instability. And everyone just pretended it was normal, because kings don't admit weakness, and dynasties don't admit mistakes. Let's gently drift toward the Habsburgs, because, of course, we are. The Habsburgs are basically the final boss of royal inbreeding. They married within their family for centuries, cousin to cousin, uncle to niece, repeating the same genetic patterns again and again. And eventually, it created the famous Habsburg jaw, long faces, protruding jaws, speech problems, breathing issues, eating difficulties. But beyond appearance, there were deeper issues: mental instability, physical weakness, developmental problems, fragile immune systems, kings who couldn't rule properly, heirs who couldn't function independently. Charles II of Spain is the quiet tragedy of it all. Born into the most powerful dynasty in Europe, and yet physically weak, chronically ill, developmentally delayed, could barely walk properly, could barely speak properly, constantly sick, mentally fragile, emotionally unstable. His body was the genetic collapse of centuries of dynastic decisions, and the court just called it God's will, because admitting genetic failure would mean admitting political failure. So instead, they prayed. They blamed demons. They blamed curses. They blamed witches. They blamed religion. Anything but the family tree. Charles slept badly, ate badly, lived in constant discomfort, and ruled a massive empire while barely able to care for himself. And everyone around him pretended this was fine, because crowns demand illusion. Let's float gently to other royal children. Sickly heirs were common. Medieval medicine was limited. Hygiene was poor. Nutrition was inconsistent. Disease was constant. But royal children had extra pressure. They were watched constantly, evaluated constantly, measured constantly. Their health wasn't personal. It was political. A weak child meant a weak future. A sick heir meant instability, succession crises, civil wars, rebellions. And so royal parents lived in quiet anxiety, waiting, watching, hoping the child survived, hoping the child grew strong, hoping the bloodline continued, but many didn't. Infant mortality was high. Childhood death was common, even for royalty, even with the best care available. And when a royal child died, it was tragedy, but also logistics. Succession plans changed, marriages rearranged, alliances rewritten. Politics never paused for grief, ever. Let's drift into medieval royal parenting, because it wasn't warm, it wasn't affectionate, it wasn't nurturing in the modern sense. Children were raised by nurses, tutors, servants, guardians. Parents were distant, formal, symbolic. Kings and queens loved their children in abstract ways, as heirs, as legacies, as future rulers, not as emotional companions. And this created emotionally hollow adults. Monarchs who didn't know how to process feelings, didn't know how to express vulnerability, didn't know how to build healthy relationships. And so royal marriages were cold, distant, strategic, often miserable. Kings kept mistresses. Queens endured loneliness. Emotional intimacy happened outside marriage, because marriage was duty, not connection. And sleep became escape. Kings slept alone. Queens slept alone. Massive beds, massive rooms, massive silence. Guards outside, servants nearby, but emotional isolation inside. Big spaces feel empty when they're quiet. Big rooms amplify loneliness, and the night becomes long, slow, heavy. Let's gently slide into royal mental health. Because medieval monarchs were deeply stressed, constant pressure, constant fear, constant political tension, constant threats, constant expectations, and no therapy, no psychology, no coping tools, no emotional language, just religion, guilt, fear, and duty. Many kings had breakdowns, emotional collapses, depression, paranoia, anxiety, obsession, religious fixation, insomnia, nightmares, and it was all called temperament, or divine burden, or God's testing, or melancholy. No one treated it, no one understood it. They just lived inside it, and slept badly, and ruled anyway. Let's float toward royal insomnia, because it was common. Kings slept lightly. Queens slept lightly. Nobles slept lightly. Fear creates light sleep. Stress creates shallow rest. And medieval life was built on stress, war, betrayal, disease, death, succession, rebellion, famine, plague, politics, religion. Everything was pressure. Everything mattered. Everything had consequences. And sleep became fragmented, broken, interrupted. People slept in pieces. Short rest, long wake, rest again. Not 8 hours, not deep cycles, just exhaustion-driven unconsciousness. And still, the world moved forward. Dynasties rose. Dynasties fell. Bloodlines merged. Bloodlines collapsed. Empires formed. Empires disappeared. All while people kept lying down in beds, in straw on stone floors, in castles, in inns, in monasteries, in halls, in tents, under stars, wrapped in wool, listening to fire, listening to wind, listening to silence, drifting into sleep. Let's stay there, in that stillness, in that quiet, in that slow rhythm of history breathing. No urgency, no rush, no noise, just time, just rest. Just the long human habit of closing eyes and letting the world fade for a few hours. Let your breathing slow. Let your thoughts thin out. Let the images blur. Let the dynasties dissolve into fog. Let the crowns fade. Let the castles fade. Let the roads fade. Just quiet, just stillness, just rest. And when you're ready, we'll drift again, slowly, softly, gently, forward through time. We're sliding now into royal marriages, not love stories, not fairy tales, not romance, just contracts, agreements, alliances, borders, written in wedding vows, bloodlines stitched together with ceremony and silk. Medieval royal marriages were business deals, pure and simple. Love was not part of the equation. Attraction was optional. Compatibility was irrelevant. Consent was symbolic. The goal was power, land, claims, peace treaties, trade routes, political stability, and children, always children. Heirs were the product. Everything else was background noise. Princes and princesses were promised to each other as children, sometimes as babies, sometimes before they could speak, sometimes before they could walk. Entire lives planned before personalities existed, before identities formed, before preferences developed. Childhood became preparation. Education was shaped around future roles. Girls trained to be queens. Boys trained to be kings. And when the wedding came, it was ceremony without intimacy, performance without connection. Two strangers meeting for the first time in public, in front of crowds, under religious authority, bound for life. Because divorce was nearly impossible. Separation was scandal. Unhappiness was normal. Silence was expected. Queens left their families forever. Countries, languages, cultures, homes, everything familiar. They arrived in foreign courts where no one spoke their language, where customs were different, where food was different, where religion sometimes differed, and they were expected to adapt instantly, smile, produce heirs, represent stability, carry the dynasty, and do it quietly. Emotional needs were irrelevant. Loneliness was routine. Homesickness was weakness. Tears were private. And many queens lived isolated lives, surrounded by servants, but emotionally alone, married to men they barely knew, men who were often older, sometimes much older, sometimes cruel, sometimes indifferent, sometimes sick, sometimes mentally unstable, sometimes politically obsessed, and kings weren't happier either. Many kings were trapped in marriages they didn't choose, married for politics, bound by treaties, forced into intimacy with strangers, expected to perform royal masculinity, produce heirs, maintain mistresses quietly, balanced public image and private frustration. Emotional intimacy went elsewhere. Lovers, mistresses, favorites, court relationships. Affairs were normal, expected, almost institutional. Queens were supposed to tolerate them, as long as heirs were legitimate, as long as scandals were controlled, as long as politics stayed stable. Marriage was duty. Love was extra optional, rare. Let's drift into royal bedrooms. Because they weren't romantic spaces, they were political spaces. Beds were symbols. Heirs were conceived under surveillance. Witnesses sometimes present. Curtains drawn, but people waiting outside. Because legitimacy mattered. Everything was recorded. Everything was documented. Births were public events. Royal bodies were not private, ever. A queen's pregnancy belonged to the state. A king's fertility belonged to the crown. Their bodies were political tools, and sleep in these rooms was heavy, weighted, not peaceful, not safe, not personal. The bed wasn't rest, it was responsibility, expectation, pressure, and after ceremonies, after rituals, after obligations, kings and queens often slept separately, different rooms, different schedules, different lives, connected only by duty. Let's float gently into emotional isolation at court. Because royal courts were crowded but lonely, full of people, servants, nobles, advisors, guards, priests, courtiers. But real connection was rare. Trust was dangerous. Vulnerability was risky. Everyone wanted something. Everyone watched everything. Every word mattered. Every expression mattered. Every mood was interpreted. And so monarchs learned to be guarded, controlled, distant, calm, emotionless. And that created deep internal loneliness. Kings surrounded by people, but emotionally isolated. Queens admired, but unloved. Princes trained, but not understood. Princesses decorated, but unheard. Human beings reduced to symbols, roles, functions, titles, and sleep became the only quiet place, the only private moment, the only space where masks dropped, where posture relaxed, where breathing slowed, where identity softened. Let's drift into royal routines, days filled with ceremony, protocol, meetings, rituals, meals, appearances, court functions, religious observances, endless structure, endless repetition, predictable rhythms, controlled lives, and nights filled with silence. Big rooms, thick walls, heavy curtains, flickering candles, shadows on stone, wind through windows, guards walking halls, footsteps echoing, doors closing, locks turning, and kings and queens lying in massive beds, staring at ceilings, listening to the sounds of castles breathing, stones settling, wood creaking, fire dying, wind moving, and thoughts circling. Duty, fear, politics, legacy, children, succession, enemies, allies, betrayal, mortality, God, judgment, heaven, hell, everything heavy, everything slow, everything endless, and eventually sleep, not deep, not peaceful, but enough to survive another day. Let's gently move into generational repetition, because royal trauma repeated. Cold parents raised cold children. Distant kings raised distant heirs. Emotionally empty queens raised emotionally restrained daughters. And the system continued, generation after generation. Dynasties passing down not just crowns, but emotional patterns. Silence, distance, duty, suppression, control. And those patterns shaped Europe, shaped politics, shaped wars, shaped borders, shaped history. All built on human psychology that never got rest, and yet life continued. Births happened, weddings happened, deaths happened, successions happened, thrones changed hands, flags changed colors, empires shifted, borders moved, and people kept sleeping in beds, in halls, in straw, in castles, in inns, in monasteries, in tents, in wagons, under skies, under roofs, wrapped in wool, wrapped in silence, wrapped in exhaustion. Let's stay in that rhythm, slow, gentle, unrushed. Let the world quiet, let the courts fade, let the crowns fade, let the dynasties blur. Just breath, just stillness, just rest. History flowing like a low, steady current, and you floating with it. No effort, no thinking, no holding, just drifting. Now we're sliding into royal childhood. Not the fairy tale version, not the storybook version, not the soft version, the real version, the strange version, the emotionally distant version, the deeply structured version. Royal children were not raised as children. They were raised as future assets, future queens, future kings, future alliances, future bargaining tools. From birth, their lives were mapped, titles assigned, futures planned, marriages pre-negotiated. Their identities were shaped before their personalities even formed. Childhood was not exploration. It was preparation, training, discipline, protocol, behavior, etiquette, silence, control, and they were surrounded by adults constantly. Nurses, tutors, priests, servants, guards, advisors. Rarely by parents, rarely by affection, rarely by warmth. Emotional connection was not prioritized. Structure was, obedience was, performance was. And many royal children grew up in emotional isolation, always watched, always evaluated, always corrected, always reminded of who they were supposed to become, not who they were. And this created fragile psychology, soft bodies, soft minds, weak immune systems, anxiety, dependency, fear of failure, fear of disapproval, fear of God, fear of punishment, fear of disgrace, fear of sin, fear of weakness, everything wrapped in expectation. Let's float gently into spoiled royalty, because some children were overprotected instead, sheltered, isolated, kept inside castles, fed rich food, rarely exposed to hardship, rarely exposed to normal life. They grew up disconnected from reality, detached from suffering, detached from common people, detached from struggle. They lived in rooms full of luxury, but empty of meaning. Their world was small, controlled, artificial, and this created strange adults, fragile kings, emotionally immature queens, adults who never learned independence, never learned resilience, never learned empathy, never learned real responsibility. And when they ruled, it showed. They were impulsive, emotional, easily influenced, easily manipulated, easily overwhelmed, and surrounded by advisors who controlled them, used them, spoke for them, ruled through them, because power doesn't need strong rulers, it just needs symbols. Let's drift into fragile airs, because medieval royalty produced many weak successors, sickly princes, chronically ill children, developmentally delayed heirs, mentally unstable successors, and everyone just pretended they were strong, because admitting weakness threatened the system. A weak heir meant rebellion, civil war, power struggles, political instability. So courts created illusions, ceremonies, rituals, displays of strength, performances of health, even when the body was failing, even when the mind was fragile, even when the ruler was barely functioning, and the pressure crushed them, softly, slowly, over time. Let's float into strange court habits, because elite life creates strange behavior. Medieval courts were rigid, controlled, ritualized. Everything had rules: who sat where, who spoke first, who entered rooms first, who walked ahead, who followed, who ate first, who served whom, who bowed, who stood, who waited, who moved. Everything had hierarchy. Everything had order. And people lived inside these structures constantly, which created obsessive behaviors, ritual thinking, superstition, repetition, habit. Kings had routines that never changed. Queens had rituals that never shifted. Meals at exact times. Prayers at exact times. Ceremonies at exact times. Sleep schedules. Wake schedules. Everything structured. Everything predictable. Everything controlled. And when control is constant, anxiety hides underneath. Fear of disruption. Fear of chaos. Fear of disorder. Fear of losing power. Fear of change. Let's drift into elite decay, because medieval elite life wasn't sustainable. It looked powerful. It looked stable. It looked eternal. But inside, it was fragile, built on politics, built on alliances, built on bloodlines, built on loyalty that could shift overnight, built on marriages that created enemies as often as peace, built on succession systems that collapsed constantly, built on fear, built on illusion. And slowly, quietly, dynasties decayed, bloodlines weakened, empires fragmented, kingdoms split, families destroyed themselves from inside, through rivalry, through betrayal, through greed, through paranoia, through obsession with power. And the people inside these systems lived slow, heavy lives, surrounded by wealth, surrounded by luxury, surrounded by comfort, but emotionally starved, spiritually anxious, psychologically fragile. And at night, when the castles went quiet, when the halls emptied, when the guards slowed their steps, when the candles dimmed, when the fire burned low, the elite world became still. Kings lying in massive beds, queens lying in massive beds, princes in decorated chambers, princesses in silk rooms, all of them alone with their thoughts, with their fears, with their identities, with their roles, with their expectations, with their futures, listening to the sounds of stone, wind through cracks, footsteps in corridors, wood settling, fire popping, silence stretching, and sleep coming slowly, shallow, light, fragmented, never deep, never peaceful, just rest enough to survive tomorrow. Let's float into the long rhythm of repetition. Day after day, ceremony after ceremony, meal after meal, prayer after prayer, meeting after meeting, protocol after protocol, life repeating, predictable, controlled, slow, and that repetition became comfort, structure became safety, routine became stability, and within that monotony, people found a strange peace, a quiet acceptance, a dull calm, not happiness, not joy, just existence. And that's what most medieval elite life really was. Not drama, not constant chaos, not non-stop conflict, mostly routine, mostly repetition, mostly waiting, mostly quiet days, quiet nights, long years, slow time, and people aging inside the system, bodies slowing, minds dulling, energy fading, replaced by younger generations who repeated the same patterns, the same marriages, the same politics, the same mistakes, the same emotional distance, the same structures, the same cycles, history looping again and again, like breathing, in and out, rise and fall, birth and death, crown and grave, dynasty and dust. And through it all, people slept in castles, in beds, in chambers, in halls, in inns, in monasteries, in tents, in wagons, on straw, on feathers, on stone, wrapped in wool, wrapped in silence, wrapped in exhaustion. Let's stay there, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the slow flow of time. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts soften, let the images blur, let the castles fade, let the crowns fade, let the courts fade, let the children fade, let the dynasties fade. Just darkness, just calm, just rest. The long human rhythm of lying down, closing eyes, letting the world disappear for a while, and the story keeps moving, softly, gently, quietly, without urgency, without noise, without effort. Just time, just sleep, just history, breathing. History remembers names, but it forgets people. It records kings, but not their thoughts. It preserves crowns, but not the minds that carried them. It writes down dates, battles, treaties, and successions, but it lets the human beings behind those events dissolve into silence. Most monarchs are not remembered as people. They become titles, labels, lines in books, stone carvings, cold statues. Their fears disappear. Their loneliness disappears. Their doubts disappear. Their exhaustion disappears. Only their names remain, floating in records, without voices, without faces, without stories. For every famous ruler, there were dozens who were barely known, kings who ruled for a few years, queens who died young, regents who governed quietly, princes who never reached the throne, princesses who vanished into political marriages, nobles who held power for decades and left no trace, entire dynasties that ruled regions and then disappeared so completely that even their names faded from memory. History moves forward, and it does not look back often. Forgotten monarchs lived full lives. They had routines, habits, personal fears, personal comforts, private thoughts. They woke up in the mornings, they ate meals, they spoke to servants, they listened to advisors, they walked through halls, they sat on thrones, they made decisions, they worried, they doubted, they hesitated, they hoped, and at night they lay down in beds and slept like everyone else. Their power vanished in darkness. Their titles meant nothing in dreams. Their authority dissolved in rest. Lost dynasties were once powerful. They ruled lands, controlled cities, collected taxes, led armies, built castles, funded churches, created laws, shaped lives. Their banners flew over towns. Their symbols were carved into stone. Their names were spoken with respect and fear. And then they ended. Through succession, failure, through political shifts, through conquest, through alliances, through marriage, through rebellion, through collapse, and the world moved on without them. Their castles emptied, their palaces decayed, their halls went silent, their courts vanished, their bloodlines thinned, their descendants became ordinary, their wealth dispersed, their lands changed hands, their symbols were replaced, their flags disappeared, their stories shortened, their memory faded, their existence became footnotes. Unnamed nobles filled medieval courts, people with influence, power, authority, land, wealth, responsibility, but no legacy, no record, no remembrance. They advised kings, governed provinces, managed estates, led armies, collected taxes, enforced laws, and then they died. Their names recorded in documents that no one reads, their lives reduced to ink, their existence compressed into lines on paper, their thoughts gone, their feelings gone, their personalities erased. History is not kind to anonymity. It preserves power structures, not human experiences. It keeps systems, not emotions. It remembers institutions, not individuals. It records crowns, not minds, thrones, not hearts, dynasties, not loneliness. Most medieval elites lived quiet lives, not dramatic, not legendary, not extraordinary. Routine lives, predictable days, structured schedules, repetitive duties, ceremony, protocol, meetings, meals, prayer, administration, travel, correspondence, sleep, repetition. Life moved in cycles, not in climaxes, not in peaks, not in dramatic arcs, just steady existence. They aged quietly, bodies slowed, energy faded, roles shifted, authority transferred. Younger generations replaced older ones. The system continued. Individuals changed, faces changed, names changed, structures remained. Life moved forward without pause. Royal children became royal adults. Royal adults became aging rulers. Aging rulers became memories. Memories became records. Records became dust. Dust became silence. There is a quiet sadness in historical anonymity, not tragedy, not drama, just erasure. Lives fully lived and fully forgotten. Thoughts that mattered deeply to the person thinking them and not at all to the future. Worries that felt overwhelming and left no trace. Joys that felt important and vanished completely. Fears that shaped decisions and disappeared from memory. Medieval people were not thinking about legacy. They were thinking about survival, stability, food, health, safety, duty, faith, work, family, tomorrow. Their worlds were small. Their concerns were immediate. Their lives were grounded in routine. They did not imagine themselves as history. They imagined themselves as people trying to live another day. At night, they lay down. Kings, queens, nobles, servants, farmers, merchants, soldiers, pilgrims, monks, children, old, people, rich, poor, powerful, powerless, all the same in sleep, all breathing, all resting, all human, all temporary. Sleep erased hierarchy. Darkness erased status. Silence erased identity. Dreams did not care about crowns. Rest did not recognize titles. Unconsciousness made everyone equal. History continued while they slept. Borders shifted. Empires rose. Empires fell. Dynasties formed. Dynasties ended. Systems changed. Structures evolved. And people kept lying down at night, closing their eyes, letting the world disappear for a few hours. Generations passed this way, one after another. Lives layered over lives, stories built on stories, names stacked on names, and most of them forgotten. Stone remembers longer than people. Buildings outlive families, castles outlive dynasties, churches outlive kings, walls outlive empires. But even stone crumbles, even monuments fall, even ruins disappear. Time wears everything down. What remains is not the people. It is the pattern: birth, life, routine, work, rest, sleep, death, repeat. The same rhythm across centuries, across empires, across cultures, across classes, across borders. The same human cycle: waking, moving, living, lying down, breathing, sleeping, ending. Forgotten monarchs disappear into that rhythm. Lost dynasties dissolve into it. Unnamed nobles vanish inside it. History absorbs them quietly. No spotlight, no ceremony, no memory, just time. And the world keeps turning, night after night, breath after breath, sleep after sleep. Existence continuing without noise, without urgency, without meaning attached. Just continuation, darkness, silence, stillness, rest. Humanity moving forward gently, while everything else fades behind it. History does not move in moments. It moves in patterns. Long, slow, repeating patterns that stretch across centuries. People often imagine the past as dramatic, loud, full of turning points and great events. But most of human history is quiet, ordinary, repetitive, soft, built from daily routines, not major moments. Most lives are not defined by wars, revolutions, or crowns. They are defined by waking up, working, eating, resting, and sleeping, over and over again. The same structure repeating across time, across cultures, across empires, across continents. Medieval life followed this rhythm. Not excitement, not constant crisis, mostly routine. People woke with the sun, worked through the day, ate simple meals, spoke to the same people, walked the same paths, lived in the same spaces, and at night they lay down and slept. The world turned slowly, time moved gently, days blended into weeks, weeks into years, years into lifetimes, and lifetimes into memory, and memory into nothing. Kings lived this rhythm, so did peasants. Queens lived it, so did servants. Nobles lived it, so did farmers. Power changed the environment, but not the structure of existence. Everyone still woke up tired. Everyone still felt hunger. Everyone still aged. Everyone still got sick. Everyone still grew weak. Everyone still lay down at night and closed their eyes. Titles did not change biology. Crowns did not change exhaustion. Wealth did not stop time. Medieval societies were built on repetition. Seasons determined life. Planting, harvest, winter, spring, summer, autumn. The same cycle every year. Work followed the land. The church calendar shaped time. Feast days, fast days, holy days, market days, ritual days. Everything structured, everything predictable. Life felt slow because it was slow. Change took generations, not years. Innovation moved gradually. Culture shifted quietly. Traditions stayed stable for centuries. People adapted to this pace. Their minds were shaped by it. Patience was normal. Waiting was normal. Stillness was normal. Silence was normal. There was no rush culture, no urgency culture, no speed, no constant stimulation, no endless noise. Life was physically demanding, but mentally simple. Survival mattered more than ambition. Stability mattered more than progress. Routine mattered more than excitement. Homes were quiet at night. Villages went dark early. Candles were expensive. Firewood mattered. People did not stay awake late for entertainment. Darkness meant rest. Silence meant sleep. The night was not busy. It was empty. Wind, insects, animals, occasional voices, occasional footsteps, but mostly quiet. Even cities became calm at night. Gates closed, streets emptied, taverns quieted, fires dimmed, windows darkened. The world slowed down. The pace of life followed the sun, not clocks. People slept deeply from exhaustion, not luxury sleep, not comfortable sleep, but real rest, the kind that comes from physical labor and long days. Bodies gave in, minds shut down, thoughts faded quickly. Sleep came easily because energy was spent completely. There was no concept of productivity culture, no optimization of time, no obsession with efficiency, no constant pressure to improve. People lived inside tradition, not innovation, inside continuity, not disruption, inside structure, not chaos. Life felt heavy but stable, hard but predictable, demanding but familiar. There was comfort in knowing tomorrow would look like today, that next week would look like this week, that next year would follow the same seasons. Generations grew up in the same patterns their parents lived. Children learned routines early, work habits, social roles, expectations, responsibilities. There was little choice, but there was also little uncertainty. Identity was fixed. Place in society was fixed. Life path was mostly determined at birth. And within that structure, people found meaning in small things: family, community, faith, routine, familiarity, belonging, tradition, simple comforts, warm food, fire in winter, shade in summer, shared meals, shared labor, shared silence. Even suffering became normalized. Disease, death, loss, hunger, hardship. These were not shocking. They were part of life. People adapted emotionally. They grieved, but they also accepted. Loss was expected. Mortality was understood. Impermanence was normal. This created a calm acceptance of life's limits. Not despair, not nihilism, just realism. People did not expect happiness as a constant state. They expected survival, stability, continuity, peaceful days, restful nights. Sleep was not romanticized. It was necessary, functional, natural, the body's response to effort. A pause, not a luxury. Darkness meant rest. Beds were not symbols of comfort. They were tools for recovery. People slept wherever they could, in homes, in barns, in halls, in inns, in monasteries, on straw, on wood, on stone, on cloth, on the ground, wrapped in blankets, wrapped in cloaks, wrapped in wool. Sleep did not require comfort. It required exhaustion. And when people slept, the world kept going. Animals moved. Wind shifted. Fires burned low. The earth cooled. The stars moved. The moon crossed the sky. Time passed quietly. History did not pause for anyone. Empires rose and fell while people slept. Borders changed while people slept. Kings died while people slept. Dynasties ended while people slept. Life moved forward while minds rested. Most people never knew the big events of their time. They felt the consequences, not the causes. They experienced higher taxes, new rulers, new laws, new borders, new lords, but they did not see the meetings, the treaties, the wars, the decisions. History happened far away from their lives. Their reality stayed small, local, personal, immediate, family, village, work, land, faith, routine, sleep. And this created a deep, quiet continuity, the same rhythms repeating for centuries. Human life flowing gently forward like a slow river. No sudden jumps, no sharp turns, just steady movement. Time softened everything. Pain faded, fear faded, memory faded, importance faded. What felt urgent became distant. What felt permanent disappeared. What felt powerful became irrelevant. The only constant was the cycle. Birth, growth, work, aging, rest, death, repeat. Humanity has always lived inside this rhythm. Before empires, after empires. Before kingdoms, after kingdoms. Before crowns, after crowns. The structure remains the same. Only the costumes change. And in every age, people lay down at night, closed their eyes, let their thoughts fade. Let the world disappear for a while. Let tomorrow wait. Let responsibility pause. Let identity dissolve. Let everything become quiet. Sleep equalizes everything. It removes status. It removes power. It removes fear. It removes control. In sleep, everyone is the same. Vulnerable, human, temporary. This is the soft truth of history. Not the battles, not the thrones, not the borders, not the empires. Just people lying down at night, breathing, resting, existing. The long human story is not loud. It is quiet. It is slow. It is repetitive. It is gentle. It is ordinary. And that is what has carried humanity forward. Not greatness, not glory, not ambition, but routine, continuity, rest, sleep. The simple act of surviving one day and waking up to live the next. The world keeps turning. Nights keep coming. Days keep rising. People keep breathing. Time keeps moving. History keeps flowing. And everything else slowly fades into the background. The lives of ordinary people, even those in noble households, were structured around predictable patterns. Meals, prayer, labor, and rest followed routines that were remarkably consistent over decades. Children woke early to be trained in manners, literacy, or combat, depending on their station. Adults performed duties assigned by their roles, whether managing estates, supervising laborers, collecting taxes, or enforcing law. Even for kings and queens, whose names echo through history, daily life was constrained by schedules, ceremonies, and rituals that dictated every waking hour. Power altered circumstances, but it did not change the underlying repetition of life. Food shaped rhythm as much as time itself. Harvests dictated activity for most people. Planting in spring, tending crops through summer, reaping in autumn, and surviving winter through stored food defined the pace of existence. Nobles enjoyed more variety, but even they adhered to seasonal availability. Feasts punctuated the calendar, often aligned with religious observances, festivals, or political events. The structure of meals, like the order of prayer or attendance at court, reinforced hierarchy and repetition. Daily sustenance was intertwined with ritual, and meals became markers of status, age, and obligation as much as nourishment. Religion framed the temporal and spiritual life of the medieval world. Bells marked canonical hours. Prayers punctuated the day. Monks, nuns, and clergy devoted themselves to structured routines of meditation, service, and observance. Nobles and peasants alike observed feast days, fasts, and holy seasons. Life moved according to a sacred rhythm, tying work and rest to spiritual cycles. Belief was not merely a private matter. It structured public and private life alike. People measured time by prayer, labor, and sleep, not by clocks or calendars as we know them. Even leisure was bound by expectation. Hunting, hawking, music, dancing, and games were often exercises in skill, display, and status rather than personal pleasure. Nobles practiced archery, jousting, or swordsmanship to maintain physical and social readiness. Courtly entertainments adhered to tradition, showcasing etiquette, knowledge, and aesthetic taste. Ordinary people found reprieve in local festivities, markets, and communal gatherings. But these were brief departures from routine rather than escapes. Play, when it existed, was embedded in structure. Freedom was limited, spontaneity rare. Life demanded attention to hierarchy and social position. The placement of individuals at meals, in ceremonies, or during travel was carefully regulated. Social norms governed every interaction. A misstep could damage reputation or limit opportunity. Nobles negotiated marriages to consolidate power, manage land, and maintain influence. Even seemingly private choices were constrained by public expectation. Children, from a young age, learned to navigate these social structures, internalizing rules, hierarchy, and decorum. They were trained not to think of themselves as individuals, but as components of a larger system. The physical world reinforced these patterns. Castles, manors, and towns dictated movement, access, and control. Halls, chambers, staircases, and gates structured behavior. Private and public spaces were carefully separated. Bedrooms for sleeping, chambers for private discussion, halls for assembly. Servants moved according to schedules, often anticipating the needs of their lords. Architecture was as much a tool of control and ritual as it was shelter. Even in rural villages, spatial arrangements reflected social order. With lordly estates dominating landscapes and common cottages lining roads and fields, death and illness were constant companions. Mortality was high. Disease spread quickly, and medical knowledge was limited. Even the elite were not exempt from sudden illness. Children died young, heirs were fragile, rulers succumbed to fevers, and epidemics could alter political landscapes. Life expectancy was low by modern standards. These realities shaped behavior, priorities, and emotional expression. Anticipation of death instilled caution, adherence to ritual, and reliance on faith. People accepted fragility as natural, forming patterns of care, preparation, and response that reinforced routine and social cohesion. Sleep served both body and mind. Exhaustion dictated its arrival. Most medieval people, regardless of station, rested deeply after long days of labor or ceremony. Nights were quiet. Darkness was pervasive. Candles, when available, burned low. Firelight flickered, but did not illuminate entire rooms. Sleep was functional, necessary, and universal. It offered a reprieve from observation, hierarchy, and labor. Even in palaces, kings, queens, and courtiers found solitude and temporary equality in darkness. Outside the courts, peasants slept on straw, benches, or floors, their bodies demanding the same rest as those in silk and velvet. Sleep erased hierarchy, difference, and duty. Time moved continuously. Generations succeeded each other in predictable cycles. Children became adults. Adults aged. The elderly passed away. Dynasties continued or failed, often quietly. Empires expanded or contracted. Borders shifted imperceptibly to those living within them. Political change was often slow, unnoticed in daily life. Most individuals experienced history indirectly, through new taxes, new lords, new laws, or new rulers. The large events recorded in chronicles were distant, leaving the repetitive structure of daily life largely intact. Memory and legacy were selective. Chroniclers recorded battles, coronations, treaties, and scandals. Ordinary lives were rarely preserved. Most people died without leaving written records. Nobles and royals were remembered because their roles mattered in social and political structures. Yet even they were largely defined by public function, not private reality. Emotional experiences, internal thoughts, and personal struggles were largely invisible to history. Loneliness, doubt, fatigue, and anxiety were constant, yet ephemeral. Only traces remained in letters, marginal notes, or tomb inscriptions. Even amid this repetition, individuals found subtle meaning. Family, faith, social bonds, and personal achievements offered context and satisfaction. Small successes, brief joys, and moments of connection punctuated otherwise structured lives. Tasks completed, duties performed, obligations fulfilled. These were markers of personal significance. Children learned skills that mattered to their households. Laborers cultivated fields and maintained estates that supported their communities. Nobles governed territories, negotiated marriages, and maintained political stability. Each act, though routine, contributed to the continuity of society. Life's cycles persisted despite instability. Empires could collapse, dynasties could fall, kings could die unexpectedly, wars could devastate regions, yet daily human routines endured. People rose, ate, labored, and slept. Life continued. Repetition ensured survival. Predictable patterns maintained social and economic stability even when larger structures were disrupted. Survival depended on adhering to these patterns. Chaos could exist at the edges, but the center of life remained grounded in repetition. This quiet persistence shaped history as much as conquest or diplomacy. Foundations of society relied on these daily actions. Fields were plowed, buildings maintained, livestock tended, taxes collected, prayers said. Individual lives, though rarely recorded, collectively sustained systems. The extraordinary existed because the ordinary persisted. Stability was a product of routine. Continuity depended on repetition. Civilization was not built solely by kings or generals, but by countless unnoticed daily actions. Sleep, work, faith, family, and ritual formed the backbone of existence. They were constant, they were universal, they were stabilizing. While kings waged wars or signed decrees, common people performed the same cycles that had persisted for generations. Food was gathered, clothing repaired, buildings maintained, children grew, adults aged, elders died. The cycle repeated, the rhythm endured. Human life, ordinary and quiet, shaped the world more than extraordinary events. Time carried everything forward. Night followed day, seasons passed, generations came and went, empires rose and fell, borders shifted, people adapted, life continued. Sleep ensured that human existence could endure another day, another generation, another century. Without rest, routine, and repetition, continuity would falter. History relied not only on kings and chronicles, but on the silent, unrecorded persistence of human lives. Even as monuments crumble and dynasties fade, the underlying human cycle remains: birth, work, social interaction, aging, death, sleep, repeat. People continue to perform these acts whether or not they are remembered. They sustain societies, economies, and cultures through sheer consistency. Their lives, while often invisible in the records of history, form the invisible scaffolding upon which empires and civilizations exist. The medieval world, with all its complexity and hierarchy, depended on this persistence. The spectacle of power and grandeur, the occasional dramatic events, and the visible actions of rulers were supported by countless unseen repetitions. Daily life's quiet stability allowed politics, religion, commerce, and culture to function. Life moved forward even when history seemed to pause. Individuals, generations, and communities adhered to rhythms that outlasted individuals, sustaining the continuity of human society through centuries. Humanity's story is built on small, repeated actions: waking, laboring, eating, interacting, sleeping. Each individual contributes imperceptibly. Each generation continues the pattern. Empires rise and fall around this enduring rhythm. Dynasties end. Names disappear. Yet the cycles persist. The quiet, constant repetition of ordinary human activity is history's backbone. It endures while monuments crumble, while wars are forgotten, while kings' names fade. It is the subtle, persistent pulse of civilization itself. Sleep, routine, and repetition remain the universal constants of life. They equalize status, stabilize society, and maintain continuity. Every human, across centuries and cultures, participates. The world turns, life persists, and history flows quietly forward. Crowns vanish in dreams. Power dissolves in unconsciousness. Names disappear in time. Only the persistent rhythm of human life, the unrecorded, ordinary, essential repetitions, stains the ongoing story of humanity. History, when stripped of its spectacle, is a gentle, slow drift. Empires rise, borders shift, dynasties form and dissolve. But the vast majority of human experience is quiet, repetitive, and almost invisible. The chronicles record battles, treaties, coronations, and scandals, but they rarely preserve the texture of daily life. Most people lived in patterns of labor, routine, and rest. Ordinary lives repeated across centuries, and that repetition became the unacknowledged backbone of history. Kings and queens existed within this rhythm as much as peasants. Even crowned figures experienced fatigue, boredom, anxiety, and loneliness. Daily life was bound by expectation and protocol. Courts operated like finely tuned machines, with advisors, attendants, and messengers following strict schedules. Monarchs received endless reports, letters, and petitions. They attended formal ceremonies, addressed disputes, signed documents, and oversaw administration. Their leisure was ritualized. Even travel followed routines: specific rooms for meetings, predetermined routes, guards in exact formations. Power dictated environment, but it did not alter the essential rhythm of living. Wake, act, eat, rest, sleep. Children of noble or royal birth were trained early. Boys learned combat, strategy, reading, and languages. Girls learned etiquette, religious instruction, household management, and political negotiation. From a young age, they were aware of expectations. Mistakes were noted. Behavior shaped their future roles. Privilege did not protect them from discipline, nor did it shield them from repetition. Daily drills, lessons, and rituals became life's structure. Play existed, but it was often structured, observed, and controlled. Spontaneity was rare. Identity was molded around duty, not personal choice. The physical environment reinforced routine. Castles, palaces, and manors dictated movement. Halls echoed with formality. Windows were tall and narrow, letting in light but not ease. Fireplaces warmed sections, not entire rooms. Private spaces were limited. Sleeping arrangements reflected hierarchy. Beds of state in chambers, smaller beds for attendants, straw for those further removed. Silence at night offered rare privacy, but even their routine persisted. Guards patrolled, candles were maintained, fires kept alive. Rest existed within parameters. Even comfort was structured. Outside the nobility, life was governed by the seasons. Planting, harvesting, storing food, maintaining tools, tending animals, and preserving resources dictated activity. Markets followed calendars. Religious observances punctuated weeks. Villages observed collective labor and communal events. People slept early due to exhaustion and darkness. Nights were long, and work was physical. Their lives demanded energy and repetition. Their survival depended on adherence to these cycles. Disruption was dangerous. Routine ensured continuity, and continuity ensured survival. Illness and death were constants. Life expectancy was low, even for the elite. Epidemics could wipe out large populations. Children frequently died young. Adults succumbed to fevers, infections, and accidents. Mortality shaped planning and decision-making. Families endured regular grief. Loss was expected, and emotional resilience was learned. Adaptation became a way of life. People integrated suffering into daily routine. Emotional highs and lows were muted by familiarity with fragility. Stability was not achieved through comfort, but through repetition, predictability, and adherence to patterns. Sleep remained universal. Exhaustion dictated it. Darkness enforced it. Beds, straw, benches, floors, materials varied, but the purpose was the same. Rest the body, quiet the mind. Nobles, royalty, merchants, artisans, laborers, all shared this need. Sleep neutralized status, suspended hierarchy, and provided reprieve from expectation. It equalized human experience, offering a temporary escape from obligation, duty, and observation. Crowns and titles held no power in dreams. Authority faded in unconsciousness. Night restored energy and resilience for the continuation of the same daily cycle. Time moved steadily. Generations succeeded one another. Children became adults. Adults became old. The elderly passed. New rulers took power. New laws were imposed. Borders shifted. Wars reshaped territories. Yet life's underlying rhythm persisted. Food had to be gathered, shelter maintained, work performed, ritual observed, sleep undertaken. Personal survival, domestic life, and basic routines endured across centuries, despite political or social upheaval. Memory is selective. Chroniclers preserved power, conflict, and spectacle. Ordinary life largely disappeared. Most lives, even those of nobles and minor royals, left few traces. Letters, receipts, marginal notes, and tomb inscriptions offered fragments. The emotional lives, fears, and anxieties of individuals vanished. Loneliness, uncertainty, and fatigue were constants. but largely unrecorded. Survival, continuity, and repetition mattered more than commemoration. Daily life, though routine, carried significance. Fields were plowed, crops harvested, animals fed, houses were maintained, roads kept passable, markets operated, taxes collected, communities functioned. Nobles and royalty enforced law, negotiated marriages, managed estates, and maintained networks of influence. Ordinary people's labor sustained society. These small, repetitive acts were the machinery of history, far more durable than dynasties or monuments. The extraordinary depended on the ordinary. Without the quiet repetition of daily life, continuity of kingdoms and empires would falter. Generations repeated these patterns, sustaining human society across centuries. Birth, labor, social interaction, aging, and death remained constants. Sleep punctuated life. Human activity, unrecorded and often unnoticed, ensured continuity. The ebb and flow of daily life allowed systems to persist. Civilization existed not solely through rulers' decisions, but through the aggregate of countless minor actions. People's lives were the invisible scaffolding of history. Even as dynasties fell, wars ended, and empires transformed, daily patterns endured. Children grew, learned roles, and inherited responsibilities. Adults executed duties, maintained homes, managed labor, and guided families. Elders passed, leaving routines for successors to follow. Life's rhythm continued, anchored in repetition. Power, wealth, and status were transient. The underlying cadence of human activity persisted. Continuity relied on this rhythm, not on monuments, laws, or titles. Sleep remained the great equalizer. It erased status, paused obligation, and suspended hierarchy. Everyone, from king to peasant, experienced this. Rest neutralized power, reduced anxiety, and renewed energy. Night allowed continuity to persist. The world moved forward while human minds rested. Crowns lost their influence in darkness. Thrones were meaningless in dreams. Life's cycles persisted through unconsciousness, sustaining human survival and social stability. Humanity's story is largely invisible, slow, and repetitive. The dramatic events chroniclers preserve exist atop a foundation of mundane action. Daily repetition maintained communities, empires, and civilizations. Without it, continuity faltered. Ordinary acts, feeding animals, tending crops, plowing fields, repairing homes, preparing meals, maintaining social relationships, sustained the structures upon which history relied. Stability was created in quiet repetition, not spectacle. The medieval world was a network of interconnected routines. Nobles, clergy, artisans, and peasants all performed essential actions, consciously or unconsciously, contributing to survival and social continuity. Life's predictability allowed societies to endure despite conflict, disease, famine, and political upheaval. Even when dynasties failed, the cycles of human activity provided continuity. Work, rest, social interaction, and ritual persisted across generations, ensuring that civilization remained functional. Time moved forward. Generations came and went. Dynasties rose and fell. People adapted. Life persisted. The human cycle, waking, laboring, interacting, aging, sleeping, remained constant. It underpinned history more securely than armies or law codes. It sustained communities, economies, and governments. It provided the continuity necessary for civilizations to survive. The quiet persistence of ordinary people shaped history far more than the extraordinary acts recorded in chronicles. Sleep, rest, and repetition remained constants. They provided continuity, stability, and survival. They equalized status and neutralized hierarchy. They restored energy and supported resilience. They preserved civilization. Crowns, wealth, and titles disappeared in darkness. Human rhythms endured. Life continued. History flowed. Generations persisted. Time moved steadily and softly, and the quiet, invisible repetition of ordinary life formed the hidden foundation upon which all recorded history rested. Human life in the medieval period, as in all periods, was a web of quiet repetition. Empires might shift, borders might move, dynasties might end, yet the patterns of ordinary existence endured. People woke, they worked, they ate, they performed rituals, they rested, they slept, and then they repeated. It is a rhythm unnoticed in most chronicles, yet it underlies every event, every treaty, every conflict, and every rise and fall of power. It is the invisible thread of history, connecting one generation to the next, sustaining continuity, even as names vanish and castles crumble. Royalty was subject to the same rhythm, though framed by pomp and ceremony. Kings and queens had responsibilities that extended beyond their personal lives: the administration of justice, oversight of armies, governance of territories, and management of intricate networks of advisors and servants. Yet even with these tasks, the daily experience was largely governed by habit and repetition. Morning audiences, midday meals, evening prayers, and night's rest punctuated every day. The grandeur of courts and the complexity of protocol imposed structure. But the underlying human pattern, waking, acting, and resting, remained constant. Children in noble and royal families were trained to fit into this structure. Boys learned skills required for leadership, diplomacy, and warfare. Girls were instructed in etiquette, household management, and sometimes even political negotiation. Daily routines included lessons, drills, supervised play, religious instruction, and observation of court behavior. Mistakes were recorded, corrected, and remembered, but the repetition of training was what shaped the child. In this way, lives were molded into predictable forms, perpetuating the social and political hierarchy through generations. Outside royal households, life was similarly structured, but shaped by necessity rather than privilege. Farmers rose with the sun, tending crops, animals, and tools. Artisans worked in workshops, crafting goods and maintaining equipment. Tradespeople followed schedules dictated by markets and demand. Life was physically exhausting, and sleep arrived naturally from fatigue rather than leisure. Nights were long and dark. Work had to be completed to survive, and failure often meant hardship or death. This created a deep dependence on routine. Predictability was safety, and repetition was security. Religion structured not only the spiritual, but the temporal rhythm of life. Bells signaled prayer. Daily prayers were observed. Holy days, feast days, and fasts punctuated the calendar. People organized their labor and leisure around these cycles. Communities synchronized their lives with these religious markers, creating coherence and predictability. Time was not measured in hours or minutes, but in the recurrence of observed practices. Daily life adhered to these cycles, offering both guidance and stability. Sleep was a fundamental equalizer. Regardless of status, sleep demanded the same surrender of body and mind. Kings, queens, and nobles experienced vulnerability similar to peasants. Darkness suspended hierarchy. Crowns and titles had no power in dreams. Beds, straw, benches, or floors all served the same purpose. Restoration, exhaustion dictated rest. Routine created conditions for survival. Sleep permitted the continuation of repetition, ensuring life could resume the next day. Without it, social structures and daily life would falter. Illness and mortality were constants. Life was fragile, and even the elite faced vulnerability. Children often did not survive past infancy. Adults succumbed to fevers, infections, and chronic conditions. Epidemics swept through towns and villages, reshaping demographics. Monarchs, despite their wealth and status, could die suddenly from illness. These realities influenced behavior, planning, and psychology. People accepted mortality as an ordinary aspect of life. Loss was expected, grief normalized, and survival depended on resilience and adherence to routine. Time passed steadily. Generations succeeded one another. New rulers took the throne. New lords assumed authority, and families continued life. Children grew, learned, and assumed roles. Adults fulfilled duties. Elders passed on experience. Continuity depended on the performance of these daily actions. Even political instability did not disrupt the underlying human rhythm. Fields were plowed, animals were tended, food was prepared, clothes repaired. Tasks completed ensured continuity across generations. Ordinary life carried history forward. Even in moments of disruption, wars, sieges, political intrigue, daily life maintained continuity. Food still had to be gathered, homes maintained, and routines observed. Survival required adherence to patterns. The extraordinary events recorded in chronicles often relied on the persistence of the ordinary. Armies needed support from farmers. Diplomacy required literacy, correspondence, and administration. Monuments were built by artisans. The continuity of society depended not solely on rulers' actions, but on the quiet repetition of countless daily tasks. Memory preserves select events, but not the texture of daily life. Most people, even nobles, died without leaving written records. Chronicles focus on battles, treaties, and rulers' actions. The ordinary human experience, the thoughts, emotions, struggles, and achievements of everyday life is largely invisible. Loneliness, doubt, and fatigue were constants, largely unrecorded. Survival and adherence to routine mattered more than individual memory. Each person contributed to society's continuity through repetition, whether or not their life was remembered. Routine structured human perception of time. Days followed predictable patterns. Weeks repeated schedules. Seasons dictated labor. Generations reproduced cycles. Birth, growth, work, aging, rest, and death formed the fundamental framework of life. Predictable repetition fostered social cohesion, stability, and continuity. Human survival depended on maintaining these patterns. Empires, kingdoms, and dynasties were sustained less by spectacle and more by the aggregate of ordinary acts performed repeatedly across years. Even as dynasties rose and fell, daily rhythms endured. Children became adults. Adults aged, elders passed away. New rulers assumed authority. Political landscapes shifted. Yet food was gathered, animals fed, tools repaired, and households maintained. Daily repetition ensured social stability. Continuity depended not on extraordinary action, but on ordinary diligence, whether by peasants or monarchs. Sleep punctuated these cycles, providing necessary restoration for the next repetition. The silent persistence of ordinary life allowed civilizations to endure. Human activity, even when unnoticed, was the foundation upon which power, wealth, and culture rested. Without the repetition of daily tasks, empires could not function. History depended as much on laborers, artisans, and households as on rulers and armies. Continuity emerged from routine, stability from repetition. The unrecorded actions of countless people provided the scaffolding for society's long-term survival. Sleep remained the ultimate equalizer. Power, status, and privilege had no influence over unconsciousness. Kings and peasants alike surrendered to exhaustion. Night allowed the body to restore itself, ensuring continuity of life. Without sleep, daily tasks would fail, social order would falter, and continuity would break. Rest was functional, essential, and universal. Darkness suspended hierarchy, leaving only the body and mind in need of restoration. Humanity's story is built from repetition. Waking, working, interacting, aging, sleeping. Ordinary lives, repeated over generations, sustain societies. Extraordinary events rely on the persistence of the ordinary. Empires are constructed on the backs of people performing countless unseen actions. Monuments and chronicles record spectacle, but continuity depends on quiet, invisible labor. Without repetition, civilization could not endure. Time continued its steady flow. Generations succeeded one another. People adapted to changing circumstances. Empires transformed, borders shifted, dynasties ended. Yet daily patterns endured. Life's cycles work, rest, interaction, reproduction. Sleep continued. Sleep enabled repetition. Repetition enabled survival. Survival enabled continuity. Continuity enabled history. Even as dynasties faded, wars ended, and monuments crumbled, the rhythm persisted. Birth, growth, labor, aging, sleep, death. These fundamental patterns endured. Human lives, repeated across centuries, formed the invisible framework of history. Ordinary acts sustained extraordinary structures. Sleep ensured the daily restoration necessary for life to continue. Routine created stability in the midst of change. And through this quiet persistence, humanity endured. The medieval world, with its hierarchies, rituals, and ceremonies, was maintained by ordinary lives repeated over generations. Crowns, titles, and monuments were temporary. The continuity of life depended on habitual action, labor, and rest. Routine was civilization's backbone. Sleep was its silent partner. Continuity, repetition, and persistence ensured survival. While history records the spectacular, the foundation lies in quiet daily life. The human cycle persisted, waking, acting, laboring, interacting, aging, sleeping, dying, repeating. Generations followed the same rhythm. Ordinary lives shaped society, sustained order, and carried civilization forward. Dynasties ended, names disappeared, borders changed, monuments crumbled. Yet human life, in its quiet, persistent repetition, endured. Sleep restored energy. Routine maintained stability. Life continued. History flowed gently, steadily, unending.